You're listening to Crushing Club Marketing, a podcast for progressive club leaders ready to increase their club's revenue. Time for change begins right now. It's not just about damage control. It's about safeguarding your club's reputation, preserving member confidence, and ensuring long-term stability. In this digital, right now world, having a crisis communication strategy is no longer a luxury, it's a necessity. In this episode, crisis communications expert Andy Skoogman of the Skoogman Group joins me and shares invaluable insights and tips for turning potential threats into opportunities for stronger community engagement. Hi, and thanks for stopping in. Well, you never know when your club is going to encounter a crisis, and it could be anything from a fight on the course between members. It could be a member that is arrested for a DUI after a club event. And God forbid, it could be a fatality and a horrible accident that happens. Because the fact is, accidents do happen and things happen that you cannot plan for. But the one thing you can plan for is how the club is going to respond. So often, communications is a soft spot in member relations or in club operations for whatever reason. So not only is ongoing member communication an issue, crisis communication, in many cases, isn't even on the radar of club leaders. And these days where everyone has a phone and is basically a citizen journalist, if you will, clubs can be really vulnerable. So today, an old friend joins me to talk about crisis communication. Andy Skoogman, who is the founder and owner of the Skoogman Group in Minnesota, is my guest today. And Andy and I were in television news at the same time in the Twin Cities back in the early 2000s, which kind of dates us both. We both left the business around the same time as well to start our own businesses. But over the years, Andy and I have talked a lot about crisis communication, and as well, we've talked a lot about golf, as we're both golfers. But he's going to explain his experience much better than I can. And at the end of this episode, my hope is that you have some nuggets that you can take to your next board meeting to start discussing, if you haven't already started this. So Andy and I caught up recently. He was actually on the road in Boston with his daughter, and I managed to track him down by cell phone. Andy, thanks for joining me today.
Ed, absolutely. Nice to talk to you again.
And it is, it's so great to catch up. And before we started recording, Andy and I were just recapping and getting caught up. It's been several years it's been several years since I've actually seen you in person, actually.
It has been. It's been a long time since we've talked or seen you in person. And seen each other in person for sure. So it's good to see you, Ed.
Nice. Yeah, we go back a long way, but for the people that are not familiar with you, which I would imagine is a decent number of people who might listen to this episode, tell the folks a little bit about your background and how you ended up in crisis communications, among other things.
Well, my background is obviously similar to yours. Started out as a television journalist. Worked my way around the country, worked in small towns, Duluth, Minnesota, Clarksburg, West Virginia, Lansing, Michigan, made my way back to my hometown of Minneapolis, St. Paul. Spent almost 13 years as a reporter, spent a lot of time covering law enforcement. I was a general assignment reporter. Also, like you, I covered sports too as well, because that's a huge passion of mine. Golf is one of the biggest parts of my life since I was a little kid. So I love sports, covered sports, and I covered general assignment news. But, I always had in the back of my mind, why are these companies, why are these organizations, why are these politicians, why are they talking the way they are? Why are they saying this and that? And I always looked at it a little bit different, I thought. So in 2004, a long time ago, almost 20 plus years ago, I got out of the TV business and started working, really doing media training with law enforcement, with military leaders headed to Iraq, Afghanistan, and Kosovo back in the mid 2000s when things were certainly things were heated up. We were at war, and I helped general officers that were headed off overseas to just how do they work with the media? What do you say to them? When do you say it? Just so that their stories could be told. I parlayed that into working in law enforcement. I was a spokesperson for a major city police department. I was also I ran a statewide law enforcement organization in the state of Minnesota for 8-9 years, where I did a lot of work with, in the law enforcement industry. If we know anything and see anything, certainly law enforcement is often in the midst of a crisis, and they haven't historically done a very good job at communicating their side of the story. So most recently, I've spent a lot of time with the Minneapolis Police Department, and Minneapolis is of course, the epicenter of law enforcement reform ever since George Floyd was murdered in 2020. And we're 5 years after that. And so I'm really I believe, Ed, like you, I'm a storyteller at heart. And it doesn't matter if I'm telling stories as a reporter or if I'm helping organizations try and get the accurate story out, because you and I know very well that the media only tells a very small portion of a story. They don't have the time.
Yeah.
They don't have the format to tell a lengthy story. So it's really about how do you frame this? How do you communicate so that your side of the story is really positioned in the best way possible? So that's kind of in a long nutshell. That's been my career.
Yeah, it's interesting just listening to you and the time thing, actually. So Andy and I both got out of the TV business at fairly similar times. You were 04, I was 05, early 05. And we had conversations early on about, I always wanted to try to figure out a way to work together, and you were going one way and I was going another, but we were both doing some media relations work at the time. But anyway, I digress. But let's just talk, and you're also a private club member. I mean, pretty much a lifelong private club member. Your father was a private club member. You grew up in that environment, and you've been a member of private clubs as well.
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier that golf has been a huge part of my life. Like so many people, it was such a big connection between my dad and I. My dad passed away in 2000 when I was just about 30 years old. But I had spent, since I was probably 8 years old till 28, 29, golfing with him as much as I possibly could. We played public courses for many years, but he was also a member of Minnesota Valley Country Club, which is just in Bloomington, Minnesota, a suburb of Minneapolis, a really nice old school club. And I just remember how he just loved to be out there. He just loved to just hang out, right? I mean, that's such a big part of being a private club member. And then, I got married, had some kids, but I really wanted to continue. I joined Midland Hills Country Club just in St. Paul, Minneapolis, in 2009. I wanted to join a club because I wanted my kids to have an opportunity to learn the game and have the same experience I did. So
Right.
Yeah, I've been a member since 2009. I switched clubs a few years back just because I have 4 children, Ed, and they, as you know, they take up a lot of your time. It's hard to get out there and golf,
And your
but
money.
I'm still a member. Yeah, and your money, for sure. And but I'm still a member of. I'm now a member of Forest Hills Country Club, which is outside of Minneapolis too, as well. And it's just been a great. And my oldest daughter is a hockey player, but she also plays golf in high school. So it's always great to bring them out there, let them drive the cart around, and and have fun.
That's right.
So yeah, it's been a huge part of my life for sure.
Yeah, that's awesome. So let's kind of blend the two worlds on the crisis stuff and clubs. And you think about, I guess, crisis communication in general. What do you think the biggest misconception that leaders have about crisis and crisis communications? And if we can kind of even dovetail that around like private clubs, because, we've been around those environments and seen different things through the years as well. But what are the biggest misconceptions leaders have?
Yeah, I think there's there's a number of misconceptions. There's so many of them, but I would say the top three kind of fall into these categories. I think number one is it's not going to happen to me. It's not going to happen to us. I'm a board member at a country club. This is not my job. How much do I really need to be concerned about it? Or I'm a general manager at a country club, and my board is made up of individuals who are volunteers, and they don't have time to think about this. And it's not really going to happen to me because this happens to big corporations. It happens to, brands like McDonald's and E. coli. But the truth is a crisis can happen to any organization, any individual, any entity, and we've seen it. We've seen it over and over. So I think that's number one, and I think that's important to have in the back of your mind as a leader in whatever role you are, is that it could happen. Number two, I think a lot of people think the lawyers and the public relations folks will handle it. We'll send out a press release and it'll be over because we've already done that. We did a press release yesterday. Why do we have to comment again? So I think that's, and the other piece is the lawyers will handle it. We're going to say nothing, and we're going to just let our lawyers resolve this in court. And, the reality is you might win in court, but the court of public opinion is going to linger on and on, particularly if you have a crisis that catches fire on social media and or just not even thinking about social media or traditional media, just within your own club community. That is very important, because I think when we think about crisis communications, we think about, you're going to be on NBC Nightly News, you're going to be on the Today Show, you're going to be in the media. The reality is a crisis within a community, bad news, rumors, those are all very important too. So I would say that's number two. And then the last one, I think, is that you can't plan for it. We can't plan for a crisis. We don't know what's going to happen. But the truth is you can plan for it, you should plan for it, and you better plan for it. And that really just starts with having a conversation. Do we have a communications plan? What happens if X occurs? Who's going to do what? How are we going to make sure everyone's informed? So again, I would say not going to happen to me. Lawyers and PR people will handle it, and you can't plan for it. I would say those are the three biggest misconceptions around crisis communications.
It's so interesting that you mentioned that. Number two, especially with lawyers, because, hey, country clubs have a lot of lawyers that are members that are there, and it's there must be this feeling of like, well, we'll be fine because we have attorneys who will take care of it. But you bring up the point of the court of public opinion, which is really why I wanted to, have this topic today, because it is how you are seen by people in your community, by people who are at other clubs, and that reputation does stay with you for so long. And I just want to as the intro, given the nature of private clubs and how they operate and the different types, in your opinion, what do you think would constitute as a crisis?
Well, I mean, it could be a variety of things. It could be something. The Minneapolis Golf Club many years back had a tragic event occur where they had a young girl get injured swimming in their pool. She ultimately ended up passing away as a result of her injuries. That is a crisis of epic proportions. So that's one type of crisis. That is the media crisis. That is obviously, no matter where you are, what type of organization you have, that is, it can't get any more difficult, more challenging than that. But I think you can also have a crisis where you have a member who is overserved at your bar or at a member guest day, and they're out on the course and they're enjoying themselves, having a great time. No one's really keeping track of how much they're drinking. They get in their car, they drive away, and they maybe they get in an accident and they hurt or injure or kill someone. And then it comes back to the club itself. So that is a reality that can occur. That is something that's very possible. And then you could have something, where you might, again, I'll go back to what I said earlier, where you might have some member to member arguing that turns into a fight, it doesn't ever reach the media. It doesn't reach social media, but it certainly becomes an issue within the club and might divide the club, might result in club members saying, I'm gonna move on and I'm gonna go to a different club. So there's just all sorts of different potential crises that could occur. And I don't want to be, my wife often would say that I'm a pessimist, but I'm just trying to be realistic about, and really just think about it. I remember years ago, you and I, like you said, we tried to work together on a number of different projects, but we worked with a small, kind of a locally owned bike shop in Minneapolis, and we really wanted to do an audit with them about here's all the events that you're holding, what could go wrong, and just so you're aware of it, kind of risk management. It's a lot of risk management, but what happens I think is there's risk management, and the lawyers are the ones running it, and they're like, well, your risk would be you have to pay X amount. Oh, okay, thank you. What we're saying is, what's the risk involved in holding this event? What could happen publicly? How are you vulnerable, and things like that. So I think there's just a lot of different things to think about. Without getting to the sky is falling all the time. But I just think it's important from a risk management standpoint to look at it through a public relations lens.
Yeah, and I mean, to that point, though, in this day and age of digital media and God, I just realized how old I just sounded then. But a lot of our references go back to like traditional media, traditional news media. But in those days, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, or whatever, I mean, it might have to be a fairly big event to be covered. Like, hey, if Mr. Jones was having an affair with Mrs. Smith, the news isn't going to cover that. But in today's social media, I mean, people have the ability to make things pretty big, pretty fast, even if it's really not that significant. So I guess, right? In that spirit, it's like now you're managing things that really aren't even very big, but can be damaging to your reputation.
Yeah. Everybody is their own news outlet now, right? I mean, this is where it becomes a little bit, it's a huge challenge. You are spot on. The media, traditional media, is only going to cover certain things. There's a list of priorities they have each day. They don't have time for it. However, now we have our phones. I just took a video of a fight that occurred at our member guest event, and somebody said something that was racially motivated or charged. Maybe there was some homophobic language that was used. It's out there in social media, on video. Your club is connected to it. Even if the traditional media doesn't cover it, it still becomes a crisis within your club community. And how do you address that? And I think that's where the planning comes into place. What are we going to do? How will we communicate in the event we need to share our side of the story? And, that will differ depending on what type of crisis you have, what it looks like. But again, I just think having the conversations, having just some risk management, and having a plan, just a simple plan. Who's the point person going to be? Is it going to be the club president who doesn't want anything to do with communication, or he or she may not be a very good communicator? Will it be the general manager? Who will the point person be? I just think it's important for clubs to have these types of conversations.
Can we just talk through that a little bit? And I know this is, I'm going to ask you for your opinion on this, because I think it's an interesting conversation that, and different clubs may have different protocol, or it maybe even sometimes who the clubs think should be the spokesperson for the club. Is it important that a club, if they're going to start saying, okay, well, part of our planning, we're going to figure out who our spokesperson is going to be. Does it have to be the president? Should it be the president? Should it be the general manager? Like, who should be that person if there was, something catastrophic for sure that happens? Who should be that person to make the statement?
Yeah. Well, that's a very tough question. And the answer really is, in my opinion, someone who can articulate the message and understands the format of media, and who has buy-in into what you're doing, believes in what you're doing, because I go back to, or I think about, are you credible? So it's hard. It is a very difficult. I'm having a hard time answering the question because I think it's just going to be different for every situation in every club. Best case scenario is either your president or your general manager is well-spoken, has some media has some experience, or has been media trained perhaps, just so that they understand what they're walking into. Because you and I know that an interview or a press conference is not like a normal conversation. And I think you just have to understand how to do this. It is an acquired skill, because we've seen over and over years and years of people putting their foot in their mouths, and it makes a bad situation worse. So, and what they do then, guess what? No one feels comfortable doing it, or we don't feel like we have anybody capable of doing it, or the lawyers tell us not to say anything, so we either don't say anything or we send out a statement. And you and I know that, unfortunately, a statement doesn't get you it often, if the stories are big, it often doesn't get you enough traction to give you a good positioning within that narrative, if it makes sense. I mean, the media wants to see a face, they want to see a name, they want to see a voice, they want to hear a voice. And a statement, I had a fellow reporter once tell me, I can't ask a news release any questions. That's what they said. I can't ask a news release, and they feel their job is to ask questions. So it puts you don't look transparent. So I'm kind of going on and on, but I think the answer is somebody who knows, who's somewhat savvy, articulate, genuine. That's who you put out there. And that could be the club president, it could be the general manager, it could be, maybe it's the marketing director for the club. I don't know who that is, but I think it's important to figure out who might be the best person before it happens.
Yeah, interesting. It's, as I was listening to you, I was thinking about just past experience, right? And you go, well, accountability is good, right? Someone who actually is accountable and can actually speak to some capacity of leadership. So, but there are some leaders that are horrendous speakers, and they might inadvertently step into a pile of crap because they didn't realize what they're doing, or they got nervous, or who knows, right? But there is that kind of combination of, like, it seems like that right level of authority versus and someone who's able to present information.
Yeah, it is hard. I mean, I've worked with organizations, particularly in the law enforcement world. Well, I'll do training, and really what I'm doing, the police chief is asking me to help identify the right people within who will be my spokespeople. I've worked with member organizations too, outside of law enforcement, in sort of the medical field, where they asked me to help them identify the right spokespeople. And that really is what we're looking for. Who's articulate, who has that right amount of credibility. They have to be a doctor, but we want to find the ones that will represent us the best and understand how this works. So I do think it's always a challenge. And then you have power struggles within, where you might have a president of a club who says, I'm doing this. And everybody's like, no, you shouldn't do it. But he or she's like, no, I'm doing it. I'm the president. So you get that too as well. So, So again, back to, how do we have these conversations before it really happens? And then we're scrambling. Yeah, because I'm often asked, what happens when you don't have a plan? And then I always say, what
Right.
about there's what happens when you don't have a plan? There's what happens when you don't follow the plan, and then there's what happens when you have a bad plan. And they
Right.
all sort of end up in the same situation, which is it's chaos, it's confusion, it's stress, it's anger, it's finger pointing. And guess what? Worst of all, you become unresponsive. And you and I know, again, we'll go back in 2004, 2005, it was traditional media. The news cycle was slow. You could take a few hours, 3, 4, 5 hours to decide what you're going to do. In this day and age, it is, I don't think you even have that much time anymore. So
Oh my gosh, so
preparation is
fast.
preparation is more important today in the world of social media than it was 10, 15 years ago. So you have to be ready. You have to know what your plan is and have to be ready for rapid response if and when it occurs.
Yeah. But I just love to, I don't know, shed a little bit more light on that too, because how it happens, when there is a crisis or something that happens, typically people are caught by surprise because they didn't come to work that day thinking, oh, this is a great day to have something bad happen. So it
Right.
happened, and then they've got to get their bearings and figure out what's going on, and then they got to figure out, well, who should we bring in to talk to about this? It reminds me of this. It was actually kind of a funny crisis story in a way, but it was very serious for the client, so it wasn't really that funny. But anyway, there was a business in the Twin Cities, and there was a sexual harassment complaint, but from a customer. A customer was sexually harassing an employee, and what made it unique is that the customer was a woman, and the employee was a young man, and it really wasn't. The young man was was taken off guard. Anyway, the employee went to the manager and said, "Hey, this just happened," and he was kind of freaking out a little bit by the whole thing. And well, a couple of days went by, and my client called and said, "Hey, this happened. What should we do? We don't want this ending up in the gossip columnist page." And I mean, this is like back in the early 2000s, and it was, well, sure enough, by Friday morning, or whatever day Cheryl Johnson's column ran, it ended up in her column. And my point is that when in this day and age where information spreads so much faster, you don't really have a lot of time to start and figure out to invent your crisis game plan in that moment, because then the story owns you and you don't own the story.
Yep, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, no,
I mean,
the timing is it's almost crazy how fast things happen. I remember being a spokesperson for a major city police department back about 15 years ago, and typically the media would call me and say, "Hey, here's what we've heard, right? Do you have a comment on this?" Before now, typically what will occur is it'll already be out there, and that's how I'll find out about it. Like, oh, geez, I didn't know that was even happening. And so it is unbelievable the speed in which these things can take off. And again, I'll just reiterate again, you have to be ready for, and nobody is. There's never a good, right? I mean, it's never a good time. And you're never really 100% prepared for it. But when it happens, it's nice just to be able to say, "Hey, we've talked about this. We've discussed it. Let's put this plan into action and let's go." So, and the last thing I'll say about it is most organizations are just not set up for this. They're not set up for crisis. You and I spend a lot of time. I mean, newsrooms are all about reaction. Every day we're moving, we're going here. That's how you survive. In fact, slow news days are hard because people don't know what to do with themselves.
Right.
Like, what are we doing? There's nothing happening. Same way in the law enforcement world. If things happen, people are set up and ready to go. But you get into clubs, you get into all sorts of organizations, they're just not ready to react that quickly. But there just needs to be the thought into it and an understanding that if and when this happens, we are ready and can figure it out.
Yeah, we're teeing up some things you should do at the end of this discussion. But I do have a couple things I want to run by you before we get to that point. You and I have actually talked about this years ago. We had a conversation around this, and just advice for clubs when trying to balance the need for transparency. Like so often, crisis situations become crisis because someone was trying to cover up something, and then the media or someone found out later, or the truth is revealed, or whatever. But how do you what is your approach in balancing that level of transparency with legal advice? I mean, we know legal counsel might say don't say anything, right? So but what's the in your experience, how have you walked that tightrope?
It's a very difficult situation because it kind of goes back to the power structure of every organization. Does the legal department, does the lawyer really have the ear of the CEO? Do they rely on him or her to guide them, lead them? Does the communications folks, do they have the ear of the CEO, or the leader of whatever organization it is? So I think it's sort every situation is different based on sort of the values of that organization. Maybe we're just a very open and transparent organization in general, or maybe we're not, and maybe we never have been, and that could be from a club standpoint too. So I think that's part one of it. Part two is really truly trying to have some credibility and some understanding of the cover up is worse than the story. It's always been that. If you look in history, I mean, if you look all the way back to Richard Nixon and Watergate, right? I mean, the cover up was worse than the crime itself. So
right.
I just think that's very important to remember that it's probably better. It's always better in the media, in my opinion, to swallow a very unsavory sandwich whole than it is to eat it in pieces. That's all I will say. I mean, truly, and I talk about that a lot, is that because as well as I do that anything that lingers for days and weeks and resurfaces is a really bad story. Whereas in crisis communications, it's really about containing a story and killing a story. And how do you do that? You contain it by giving everything everything we have, all the bad news at once, and swallow that sandwich whole, as opposed to eating it in pieces over weeks, because the trickle effect is really going to hurt. So my advice is always my advice is always, let's eat that up so it's full. So
yeah, the old other word, but eat. If you have to eat a poop sandwich, don't nibble.
Yes, that's right. Exactly. I didn't know what I could say on your podcast, Ed. So I just want to be careful.
Yeah, it's rated for the family. But yeah, hey, thanks for that. No, it's so true. All right, so let's just the second question that I wanted to make sure we cover is internal communication. So when things happen, I mean, this kind of goes back to the transparency. If you've got 500, 1,000, 1,500 members, whatever that is, you're not going to put a gag order on all your members, right? But if something happened that's very sensitive, what is, again, your opinion, but what is a realistic approach? I mean, how do you try to control the message on that when you might have different people who have different opinions, perspectives? They may have heard something different, seen something. How do you handle that? Because we all know that especially in social media, everyone has the ability to broadcast it themselves. In the media, if the news media gets a hold of a story, they will go after members or witnesses before they go to the spokesperson.
Yeah. You're not going to like this answer, I don't think, because it's boring. But I think it really comes back to, what is your relationship from a communication standpoint with your members. If you're the club general manager, you're the club board. I know I have not been 100% pleased with club communications over the years. What the board is doing, why they're doing it, why did they raise dues. If you're that club and you don't communicate on a daily, monthly, I shouldn't say daily, but on a monthly basis, if you don't have some type of ongoing communication, I think that's a problem. Then suddenly you have a crisis. You have bad news spreading. Where's your credibility? I haven't heard from these folks. They raised my dues. They assessed me without really having, giving me any input, giving me any heads up. And now we have a crisis situation. So when I think about your question, it really comes back to how are you communicating on an ongoing basis with your members today? Because I think that goes a long way when you try, and then if something bad happens, you send out a message that says, here's what has occurred. Here's what we're doing about it. Here's what we ask you to not spread misinformation. These are the facts that we have, and you have credibility, and you've built it up over time. My kids go to a private high school. They do a really good job of communicating on a weekly basis through newsletters and videos. And just last week, there was we got an email from the president about an employee or a vendor at the school who is under investigation for alleged inappropriate contact with some of the children. And I appreciated the message. I appreciated the information that was shared. I'm not going to run out and go spread rumors, in large part because they're always communicating with us. So I don't know if I really answered your question, but I truly believe it comes back to the values of the club. How much do you value communication with your members, knowing that when you talk to them about, we're going to raise your dues and we're going to assess you, people aren't going to like it. But you have to have those conversations. And what people want to do is avoid them. They want to avoid those conversations. And usually, right, we know the structure of these boards. I don't even get paid to be on the board. I'm not going to be the bad guy that goes out and is the spokesperson and the face of a dues increase. I mean, nobody's paying me for this. So this is where this complex board structure, volunteer, general manager. But I really think if the boards and the general managers are doing this right, they are communicating and they are out there saying, here's all the bad news we have. It is a bad news. If I get assessed $8,000 for a new patio, I'm not happy. But if they articulate what else I'm going to get for it, why we're doing it, how we're going to bring in on Friday nights, we're going to have live music out there. And, there's ways to do this. But we have to be open to the criticism, and we have to have people that are, again, willing to do it. You and I, my last kind of anecdote or example is, we're from Minnesota. My kids play hockey. I was the volunteer girls director for the Hockey Association, and we had to cut kids. We had to do all this stuff. And I finally got to the point where I'm like, I'm not getting paid for this. I don't want to be that guy anymore to do this. So, but that's kind of this is where it gets very challenging for clubs and to do. And then you have boards that, right, some people might say, yes, let's communicate this, let's not say that. And then you have paralysis and nothing's done. So long-winded answer to your question, but I really think it starts with having a closer relationship in terms of communication with your members. I think that will go a long way when and if bad news happens.
Yeah. So, probably a good starting point for, maybe my last thought is for people who are listening today, what are the things, if you're a general manager, you're listening, or a board member thinking, geez, we don't really have a game plan at all. where did they start? It seems like number one is just you better have a good communication pattern or strategy or relationship with your members through communication today. But what are some of the other things that people should really keep in mind?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's, again, it's not a sexy answer, but it's having that conversation. It is saying, what if some video got out on social media of a fight with members? What do we do? Who's going to take the lead on this? How are we going to inform the board? How are we going to inform our members? What if the media gets involved and starts calling us? Who's going to take those calls? Who's going to approve the messaging that we articulate publicly, internally to our members? I think step one is just having that conversation. Just where are we at? I think two is really looking at maybe you already have maybe the club has a marketing person that has communications experience. What are some of the vulnerabilities that you might have as a club? And I think just making sure that you're aware of that, and then really just putting something down on paper. The last thing I would say is I do think there's value in media training. And trying to help identify a couple of spokespeople that would be available, and then let them know that if something happens and we call you, we need you. Like, we don't need you like in 5 hours. We need you available ASAP. So that could become, so now I'm identifying a spokesperson who is articulate, who understands the format, and is actually responsive and is willing to give me that. I just think just that alone would be very helpful. And then I would say the last piece too is who's going to manage your social media? Like, what if there's social media out there? What are you going to do? And what's the process by which something is going to get posted? Who's going to approve it? And who's actually going to do it? Like, actually,
right. Yeah.
Like, this all sounds great, but who's going to actually upload the photo, upload the image, the statement, and put it out there? And then monitor it too, to make sure that how are they responding? So there's a lot to it, but I really do believe it just starts with a conversation, but in a serious conversation about it. And even setting aside a portion of a board meeting, 30 minutes to 45 minutes, just to have a conversation about it. And if you want, even hiring somebody like you or having you come in and just talking about it. But yeah, that's my shameless plug for you.
Thank you. I was just, what people can't see is I was just shaking my head like, no, not me.
Yeah,
there are better people than me. But yeah, no, I mean, it's great advice. I mean, it's like, it really is, it's that just in case, because information travels so fast. And then, like we always say, in the absence of information, people will make up their own stories, and it's never good.
Yeah, and it's never good.
Right. And the thing that the club sometimes, they can be so insular in how they think of stuff, like, well, it's our club, it's our family, our community, that sort of thinking. But those reputations stick with your club for a long, long time. And it can be really damaging, as from a recruiting perspective and even a retention perspective sometimes, especially if members don't feel like you handled it correctly.
Right. Well, this is the reality of Google, right? I mean, when we were reporters back in the day, you did a bad story and it would go away. It would literally go away. You wouldn't be able to find it. Now, if you are a club, there's some bad news that happens. Just Google the name of your club and it shows up on the first page of Google search. So it is. It's a whole new world, and it adds an immense amount of challenges, but it also really, I think, sounds the alarm that you need to be more prepared today than ever for a crisis.
Yeah. Well, I think that's great advice, and boy, there's a lot. I feel like I know that I could talk about this for a long time, but Andy, thanks so much. I know that you're on the move this week, and really appreciate you taking a few minutes to chat with us and offering your perspective for our listeners.
Ed, thanks. Always great to catch up, and thanks for having me on.
All right, man. thank you for listening. If you find episodes like this helpful, be sure to share it and subscribe on whatever podcast platform you're using. Until next time, keep crushing your club marketing.